Greeting you through the static of the airwaves. From the Great Plains, my name is Chance, and you're tuned in to the Mystery Report. On tonight's episode, we will be discussing an eerie piece of folklore that is sure to send chills down your spine. I will explore its origins, relay some chilling tales of purported encounters, and share some of my thoughts on the phenomenon that has come to be known as black-eyed children. Imagine you're home alone one evening minding your own business. Perhaps you're relaxing or catching up on some chores. All of a sudden, you hear a knock at your front door. You open it to find a pair of children who proceed to ask if they can come in, whether or not it be to use the restroom or perhaps the phone. At first, all seems mundane until you notice that the children's eyes are jet black, devoid of any color. This is a common situation that many folks have reported to have found themselves in, staring face to face with these entities of unknown origin or intent. Stories of these black-eyed kids, or BEKs, have been making the rounds throughout paranormal circles for decades, and many folks vehemently attest that their existence is real. But despite the introduction of many theories into the subject, definitive explanations of their purpose or nature are still unknown. There have been numerous reported encounters with these entities, and while some details do vary from witness to witness, there are many aspects that remain consistent. BEKs are almost always reported in pairs, commonly with one child being older than the other. Approximate ages can range anywhere from 6 to 16, and there have been reports of the duos being both boys, both girls, or a mix of the two. While most reports describe them as wearing contemporary clothing, with hoodies often specifically being mentioned, there have been sightings where the children are reported to wear antiquated or Mennonite-style clothing. Most often, the older child will do the majority of the talking when interacting with a witness, and the younger of the pair is described as either speaking minimally or not at all. It has been noted in many cases that the children are very articulate and polite, and BEKs will often speak in a manner that is inconsistent with their age, using language that seemingly should have been too advanced for them. Other times it has been noted that the children will use syntax and phrases that are outdated or antiquated. For example, they will refer to a phone as a telegraph. Some have even reported them speaking in a nonsensical manner. The vast majority of encounters occur at witnesses' homes. The children will insist upon needing to enter the residence, and while at first many folks will feel the urge to assist the BEKs, a feeling of terror or dread will quickly set in, and witnesses will almost always refuse the being's entry. The kids will continue to try and persuade the homeowner to let them in, often switching their reasons from needing to use the phone to needing the bathroom, or even just needing to get warm in cold weather. Some witnesses have reported that the beings radiate some form of palpable energy, and it is not uncommon for encounters to be accompanied by flickering lights, failing appliances, or full-on blackouts. Telepathy is also frequently associated with BEKs, as folks have reported that in many encounters the duo will look at each other in silence and appear to be communicating. Witnesses have also reported feeling the impulse to let the children into their homes, despite their instincts telling them not to. And chillingly, many individuals claim that the BEKs were able to read their thoughts and anticipate what they were going to say, or respond to the thought before the individual could articulate it. The BEKs seem to operate on vampire-type rules, as they appear to be unable to enter the residence forcibly without permission. Although some have postulated the beings to be vampires, that theory does seem to be less popular than others. I would say I don't generally fall in with that theory myself, because although most sightings do occur at night, I have found reports of encounters during the day. But residential domiciles are not the only sites of such eerie encounters, and unlucky souls have reported run-ins with BEKs while on walks, or even in parked cars. In fact, a car was the site of an encounter that would first bring the phenomenon to mass attention when Brian Bethel, a local reporter out of Abilene, Texas, relayed an encounter with two black-eyed kids he had in 1996. He stated that he was on his way to pay an internet bill at his provider's office. He was in the parking lot of the business one evening, writing out a check in the dim half-light, intending to leave it in the office's after-hours drop box. Two young boys around 9 to 12 years old approached his car and began knocking on the window. Bethel noted that one boy had an olive complexion with curly hair, and the other had red hair with pale freckled skin. Both were reportedly wearing hoodies. The parking lot had been near a movie theater, and the first boy requested that Bethel give them a ride to their mother's home, as they had forgotten their money to buy tickets to a showing of the new Mortal Kombat movie. Bethel was consumed by a great fear, and apparently sensing his reluctance, the boy made strange assurances to him that it wouldn't take very long, that they were just two kids and didn't have a gun or anything. Bethel stated he was subconsciously reaching to open the car door, but then suddenly noticed that the boy's eyes were pitch black, like a starless night. Upon this discovery, he immediately put the car in gear and sped off, but when he looked back in his rearview mirror, he noticed the two boys had vanished without a trace. Bethel had shared this incident with some trusted individuals on an email thread in 1998, but the story was somehow leaked to the greater internet, where it then spread like wildfire. This was the inception for the urban legend of the black-eyed children. Over the years, many have called Bethel out for possibly fabricating the event, but he has remained adamant that what he reported was indeed the truth. Since this first mainstream report, countless individuals have come forward with their own tales of encounters with these otherworldly kids. I would like to share with you a few of the more interesting ones I have found while researching this topic. I would like to note that while researching this phenomena, I have found many forums that are dedicated to relaying fictional accounts of these entities, and I have tried to omit any tale that seems to have been expressly written for entertainment purposes only. The following stories, as best I can tell, are reported to be true encounters. An individual named Chris wrote into a program called Darkness Radio in 2016 to recount a story of a BEK encounter experienced sometime the year prior. Chris's story is as follows. In 2015, around the end of April or beginning of May, I was in Oregon for work. I worked for a company that handled the customer service member privilege point of sale system with Planet Fitness, and I was there checking on a few locations. Since Planet Fitness is a 24/7 establishment, I had to cater to all the shifts and would show up to each club multiple times during the day and night. One night at approximately 11:30 p.m., I was heading to the PF location in Beaverton, Oregon. My rental car had Bluetooth capabilities and was currently playing a coast-to-coast AM episode throughout the car's speakers. The episode was a George Norrie episode, and he had Rosemary Ellen Gillion to talk about the Jinn. In hindsight, it could have been Linda Moulton Howe, but I know for sure it was the common female guest with 3 names. I remember this fact to be true though because George brought up the black-eyed kids phenomenon to her and she felt it was Jinn related. Looking back, that was a serious coincidence because what happened when I arrived at the club chilled me to the core. I'm a smoker. Nasty habit, but it's my vice. When I arrived at the club, I decided to smoke in the parking lot with the driver's side window open on my rental so I could continue to listen to Coast to Coast AM and not be in the car because rentals fine you a couple $100 for smoking inside. The PF there is in an L-shaped strip mall. I don't entirely remember all the stores in the strip mall, but the PF is all the way to the end, and all the way to the left is a pharmacy of some kind. My passenger side was parallel to the Planet Fitness, and that was about 30 feet from a streetlight. The pharmacy was about 75 yards away and obviously closed. I was leaning up against the car, smoking and playing on my phone, and looked up at the pharmacy in the light of the marquee-style sign. I could see 2 people standing outside of it. For it being near midnight, I thought how weird it was for someone to be at the obviously closed pharmacy, but the thought was fleeting and I once again was down in what was probably a safe bet. I'm assuming I was Facebooking on my phone. After a few seconds, I looked up. I noticed the 2 people, who I could now tell were kids or teenagers, were about 20% closer. It struck me as odd. I didn't see them walking to that spot. They were just there looking in at what I felt was my soul, but, more accurately, was in my general direction. From this distance, I could tell both were wearing hooded sweatshirts. They were dark in color and both kids had their hoods up. They were in the area just outside the streetlight glow. It shone on them, but not enough to see very clearly. Looking back, this should have raised some flags, but once again, I was back in my phone. I remember about this time, George and the guest were talking about evil spirit attachments from the Middle East in items and devices service members brought back home with them. Well, now I glanced back up again, and the kids were now about 25 to 30 feet away. They were once again outside the direct streetlight glow, but I could see them much clearer. This time their heads were aimed down. I could not see their faces, but I could make out their clothes. One had an olive drab green hooded sweatshirt with no visible markings or insignia. The hoodie was up over the top of what appeared to be a gray ball cap, with, once again, no markings or insignia. Baggy, nondescript jeans and black low-top shoes, also with no markings of any kind. The other was dressed very similarly, the only difference being a navy blue zip-up hoodie and hood up over what looked like a black ball cap. Khaki pants and white shoes, same as the first. There was nothing to distinguish any brands on any articles of clothing. The kids were standing still. I hadn't seen them move to their current location, and they were almost frozen there, not moving at all. I don't know how or why, but I just went back to my phone, not bothered at all. I got a weird feeling almost instantly, and looked up, and there they were. 5 feet in front of me and not moving. Just closer, just outside the shine of the streetlight. Still at ease, I tossed the cigarette butt underneath the car and asked, "What's going on, guys? Anything I can do for you?" The response I got was probably the most awkward thing in the story, but before I share it, I want you to know what I noticed just prior to the response. Their clothes were weird. They were too big. Not too big like kids wore in the 90s, but too big like hand-me-downs, and they were faded. Everything they wore you could tell the colors of, but it was just like they were dingy, I guess. I could tell by physical build that these kids were males, and by size I would say 15-ish. So after I asked if there was anything I could do for them, here was their response. The best way I can think to express how weird it was is to lay it out like a script, so I'll illustrate this beneath, picking up after my question. Is there anything I can do for you guys? Kid number 1, please kind sir. Kid number 2, may we borrow a cigarette? Kid number 1, it's very lonely at night. Kid number 2, we only need 1 cigarette. Kid number 1, thank you. Kid number 2, please. After they finished speaking in unison, they slowly lifted their heads to show me their faces. I remember thinking it's kinda late for teenagers to be out on a Thursday, and almost as if they plucked that from my head, I heard, "It's quite alright. We have permission." As soon as permission rolled off the second kid's lips, their faces were level with mine, showing me solid jet black eyes. I froze. My mind was going about 1,000,000 miles an hour because, dang it, I know what black-eyed kids are. Well, not what they are, but I know of them. I couldn't move or speak. Their faces were almost the definition of blank. Almost because the edges of their slit mouths began to curl ever so slightly, but you could see it. The inside of my stomach began to get colder, and with all my might, I tried to turn my face, but I could not. The second kid took a step forward. The movement of shoes caught my eye, and I broke eye contact. I looked down, and the moment the eye contact was broken, everything I knew about black-eyed kid encounters rushed through my head, and I turned around and ran into the club. Now when I say ran, I sprinted in loafers, and all 6'1", 250 pounds screamed the whole way. The young kids who worked at the counter just stared at me when I came in. I tried my best to explain, but they weren't cool enough to have heard about the black-eyed kids. I looked out the plate glass front and saw the two of them standing side by side facing the club. When I saw them, chills ran down my spine. This next encounter comes from an individual going by the moniker PM on phantomsandmonsters.com, who says this. This is an encounter I experienced in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where black-eyed kids sightings are prevalent. I had heard the stories, tales, legends, whatever you want to call them, since I was a young man, but never truly believed them. The black-eyed kids was mainly something I entertained as a joke or something to get a rise out of people. This changed in the summer of 2009. It was a warm night in June. I was up late, around 2 a.m., as I typically liked to stay up late, especially in the summer, since it would stay fairly warm even after the sun went down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning to my house through the back door when I was approached by two children, a boy and a girl. I was very startled once I realized they were there since I wasn't expecting to encounter anyone in my backyard so late at night. The little boy asked, "Could we come in? We need to use the phone. We are lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them had eyes so black they were like pits. This is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them, that they were there right in front of me. As I mentioned before, I had heard the legends of the black-eyed children most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my house. I darted in the back door and locked it as quickly as I could. Once I was inside, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights to try and see if they were still outside. Thankfully by then, they were gone. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point though, that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house and making sure all doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night, and it's an encounter that will stay with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and try to trick unsuspecting people to do God knows what with or to them. I am just glad my reflexes kicked in and I was able to live to tell the tale. PM would apparently later follow up with a brief description of the children, saying, "The boy was wearing a black jacket and shorts with a white shirt and a rope tie. The little girl was wearing a black dress and high white socks. I don't remember any hairstyle specifically, but their overall appearance was dark. It was dark outside as well. So I think both of their hair colors were black." This next report was shared on Darkness Radio around 2015. An unnamed gentleman relayed an encounter with BEKs while working the graveyard shift at a gas station. The gas station in question was a somewhat isolated service station off a highway in northeast Louisiana. Being the type of convenience store that was not located inside a town or even on the outskirts of one, the individual mentions that there were no other services for miles around. They stated that they were tending to their normal duties at work one night in November of 2012, when around 3 in the morning the power went out. That night there had been some intense winds, so the individual did not seem exceptionally unsettled by the incident. He used his cell phone as an impromptu flashlight and activated the backup generators, which gave emergency power to the parking lot lights as well as a hallway leading up to the cash registers. The remainder of the store would be cast in an eerie darkness. All seemed okay until the individual noticed 3 figures in the half-light at the edge of the parking lot. It seemed to him that they were a trio of kids riding bikes, and this assumption would be confirmed when 2 of the figures dismounted their bikes and walked towards the building, stopping just in front of the door. The witness was a bit uneasy, but opened the door to ask if the children were okay, and why they were out so late in that remote area. Such questions would go unanswered. A young girl from among their ranks spoke up that they needed to use his phone. He obliged and presented his cell phone to the girl, but she snapped back at him, saying, "No, I need the real one," apparently motioning to the store's landline phone. It was at this time that the clerk noticed the child's eyes, which were jet black orbs devoid of any color. Overcome with a wave of terror, he quickly shut the door and locked it, shouting at the children that they should go home. The children remained outside the station, staring at the witness for a while, before returning to their bikes and venturing back into the darkness. Later on, the clerk would make a request to his manager to see security footage of the encounter, but due to the power outage, the cameras were not operational through the duration of the event. As was previously mentioned, electrical anomalies are often associated with these entities, and one cannot help but wonder if the power outage was simply the product of an intense windstorm, or perhaps the work of more sinister forces. Our next story comes from thoughtcatalog.com from an anonymous witness who relays a reported encounter with a BEK while walking their dog. It was 1 in the morning and I was a little late on walking my dog Dakota. She's a 3-year-old German Shepherd and very tame for a big dog. Not in my entire time having her have I seen her run up to anyone. She gets very nervous around strangers. I live very close to a large park that leads into a hiking trail. There's a large area that's used as a baseball field, and the big entrance into the wilderness is surrounded by trees and darkness. Here is where I let Dakota off the leash and follow behind her as she sniffs around trying to find a spot to do her thing. This night was different though. As soon as I take off her leash, she jolts at high speed towards the trail opening. I know many of you are judging me for letting a dog off its leash, and trust me, I know I shouldn't do it, but it's one of those things you just don't tell people you do, like littering or U-turns. Plus, this was completely out of character for her, and all I could think was, if she goes in there and doesn't come back, I don't think I can go after her. I was not about to get lost in pitch-black darkness on a freezing cold night to get eaten by some mountain lions. I'd wait for her and probably call my roommate and tell him I'd be taking longer. But she didn't go in. She was standing 8 feet from the entrance when I see a tall, dark figure calmly walk out of the darkness. Anyone else would have probably freaked the heck out right there. Some creep walking out of the woods at this hour? Heck no. But I'm in pretty good shape, 6'5", and if anything, people are usually more scared of me than I am of them. Plus, the random weirdo is not a rare event in LA, even if this is a middle-class, good suburban neighborhood. So I call for Dakota, but she doesn't move. I have never seen a dog literally follow someone with their gaze, never breaking contact. It just didn't make sense. That was where the uneasiness first kicked in, but it wasn't anything serious. It was just really strange. I started jogging towards her when I notice it's a girl, about 17 or 20 years old, and around 5 foot 9 inches tall, and from what I could see, she was stunning. Long legs, beautiful body, short dark hair, almost reaching her shoulders in a tousled, sexy kind of way. Her long, messy bangs framing her face as she stopped walking to look at Dakota for a second. I couldn't make out her face really, but I didn't see a deathly pale girl in a white dress floating like your stereotypical dead girl. I saw a stunning girl in skin-tight dark jeans, boots, a dark leather jacket, and from what I could tell, she had a light complexion, but by no means did she look like a ghost. My first thought was maybe if I talk, I can get her number, but then I remembered this girl had just walked out of the hiking trail in the middle of the night. I started thinking about a documentary about female serial killers I saw once, but even if she was a crazy person, I still have no idea how she could just walk around up there when the darkness was so thick, I doubt you could see 1 foot in front of you. Even though there was something really off about all this, when I saw her stop to look at Dakota again, I lightly said to her, "Don't worry, she's harmless," to which she completely ignored me and continued walking. I think, okay, I didn't expect someone who walks around the woods in the middle of the night to keep a conversation going. I put Dakota's leash on, but she doesn't budge. All she does is take a couple steps towards the girl, then stops whenever the girl looks back at her. "I think she likes you," I say, to which again the girl just looks at Dakota. All of this felt really weird, almost like a dream, like a light feeling and that silence that sounds almost like you're underwater. No matter how much I tried to act cool, this was not normal. So here I am trying to get my paralyzed dog to budge while an intimidating, mysterious girl doesn't break eye contact with her. I was stuck between I'm so embarrassed and she's gonna pepper spray me, when she takes one step towards Dakota, and my dog has her tail in between her legs and is whimpering like she's seen the devil. That's when I knew I had to go. If anyone knows when something's up, it's a dog, and as soon as this girl is walking again, I pick up my 60-pound dog by the stomach and start speed-walking back. I probably looked like a total idiot, but I didn't care. Whatever dreamlike state I was in before had been broken by my dog's attitude. Everything inside me was telling me, go home. So I'm halfway across the field when I put my dog's leash on and set her down. She doesn't budge again. I think, are you kidding me? I will drag this dog. When I almost threw up as I turn around to see this girl standing on some benches not even 10 feet away from me. I can see her face now in the light. I kid you not, this girl was beautiful, but her eyes were blacker than black. They filled all her eyeballs. It was just 2 shiny orbs inside of 2 almond-shaped sockets. She looked completely different from the serious expression I could make out before. I swear I wanted to run, but something made me stay. I felt like I was so scared that I could hear a faint, high-pitched humming in my ears, and my entire body felt heavy. I wanted to run more than anything. I could have thought, oh, a strange chick in Halloween contacts, but I cannot explain the feeling of absolute paralyzing horror I experienced without any rationalization. I didn't have time to. These feelings hit me like a train, and I hope to God I never feel as helpless and mortified as I did then. She was not human. She was not a regular girl. And to make things worse, this girl says, in a sultry, sweet tone that I'd expected to sound like something from beyond the grave, "Does she bite?" And still on defense mode, I think I managed to mutter out my idea of a no. I don't know if anyone else knows what I mean when I say I felt like as soon as I blinked again, she would be standing right in front of me. As soon as I finished saying no, she waited a couple seconds before saying, "Do you live nearby?" To which I was going to say no, even though I did. But as soon as I went to speak, she said, "Did you drive here?" And I start walking back, trying to distance myself slowly, and again before I can speak, she says, "I'm going to need to come with you. You'll let me come with you. That's okay, right?" "It's okay. Don't be afraid." And with that, Dakota books it. I start running like a scared child, and my dog is right in front of me. I don't stop till I catch up with my dog. We're at the other side of the street, and I take this time to turn around and make sure she isn't following me. She's calmly walking back, already all the way to the other side of the park where she was before. I called my roommate to meet me halfway with the car on my way back home, and I have never walked my dog after dark again. Our next report comes to us from Ranker.com. An engineer working the night shift for a data center in Ohio had a creepy exchange and posted his tale anonymously as noetic. It was around 5 a.m. on July 31st, 2010. Noetic was taking a smoke break outside when he noticed two teenage boys standing motionlessly and staring at him from across the street. Though he felt somewhat unnerved, he finished his smoke and went back inside. 10 minutes after heading inside, the intercom buzzed. Noetic checked the monitors, and they were there. The two boys had made their way over to his building and were now staring into the surveillance camera like they could see him through it. Through the speaker, he asked what they wanted. They said nothing but motioned for him to come outside. He hit the speaker button again and told them to go away. They didn't leave, but continued to stare into the camera as if they were watching Noetic as he worked. After a short while, Noetic went to the door to chase them off. Right before opening the door, he saw them through the one-way glass and was horrified to see their eyes were completely black. He knew he had to open up the door and tell them to go away, and he decided he'd call the police if he had to. As if the boy read his mind, the moment the door opened, he said, "That will not be necessary, sir. We simply need to use your phone. Can you let us in?" Noetic was not about to fall for that nonsense. He pulled out his cell phone and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. He made sure the door was locked and went back to the monitor. Only one boy was still staring at the camera. Then he realized the second boy positioned himself out back and was staring into the camera there. By 6 a.m., both boys had moved into a blind spot with no camera coverage. Noetic waited for them to reappear, but they simply vanished. The police arrived not long after, but both boys were gone. Now, in all of the previous reports I've shared this evening, the witnesses refused to abide by the requests of the BEKs, but in our final report tonight, we will relay an encounter in which the witnesses did allow the BEKs entry into their home. This witness submitted their encounter to weekinweird.com, and it begins as follows. I live just outside of a rural town in Vermont. It's a tight-knit community where everyone knows one another and people don't lock their doors at night. There has never been any need to. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home on a dirt road just off the back route into town. It was the middle of a snowstorm and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident and broken down. It's happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that our motion spotlight was on. I could see that there were footprints in the snow that had come from our road and into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what was going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer it while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were two children standing in the snow looking towards the ground. They were a boy and a girl and could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely and had odd haircuts. The girl's hair was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They weren't dressed for winter, and my first thought was that they must have been Mennonite children, but as far as I know, there was never a large community of Mennonites near us. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa, but that's not how this felt. The children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, what do I do? And I asked the kids where their parents were. They'll be here soon, is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident, or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did it anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa, while my husband took them into the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking them if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice. They weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats, we had 4, were all hiding except Pigeon, who was in the kitchen with me. Normally, our cats are very curious and friendly, and we have to be careful that they don't run out the door when we leave. This time, none of them even tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All of the hair on Pigeon's neck was standing up, and his tail was puffed up while he looked in the living room. When I bent down to pet him and see what was wrong, he hissed and started growling and backing up until he had hid himself under the kitchen island. I have never seen him do that before. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what's wrong, and he said he had felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but that he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them too, and said that it looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I had known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with the kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back through the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The 2 children were standing at the end of the hallway. They weren't moving, and I have never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here," and they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped up to go close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw 2 men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into the car, and drove off. Our power came on about half an hour later, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume that they ran away somewhere and never came back, but the worst thing was coming home to find Pigeon in a puddle of blood on the living room floor. He had looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence, we went to see a doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than dry nasal passages, but my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked us if he had been using tanning beds, we both thought he was joking, but apparently this kind of melanoma is linked to overuse of indoor tanning. The doctors think he will recover but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. My husband has never worked an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say that I am suddenly in the worst condition of my life and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this is because I let the black-eyed children into my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids. But we know what we saw. I wish my husband had never opened the door. Feel free to publish this as a warning to others about the black-eyed kids. My advice would be to lock your doors, call the police, and wait for morning. Don't make the same mistake that I did. This encounter is absolutely fascinating. If one does believe this report, it offers a mortifying look into the possible outcome one can expect from allowing a pair of BEKs into their home. I personally don't know what to make of the medical problems and sad occurrences to their animals. The melanoma connection does seem to tie in with the theory that BEKs possess the power to manipulate energy fields and radiation on some level, and the blackout the witnesses experienced is a chilling piece to that puzzle. I only hope that the witnesses recovered and are now in good health, and pray for them to never receive such a visit again. That wraps up our reports for this evening. I must say that this is a fascinating subject and a chilling part of paranormal lore. I am unsure what to make of the BEK phenomenon. I can understand why many individuals are quick to dismiss the countless reports as hoaxes, or even the work of individuals who are aware of the legend and simply don black contacts in an effort to scare unsuspecting victims. But I cannot help but wonder if the accompanying feelings of dread and terror are the result of something more otherworldly, or perhaps simply a product of hysteria brought on by a witness's prior knowledge of the subject. And what of the reported electrical anomalies that often accompany encounters? Are these simply narrative embellishments, eerie coincidences, or perhaps a physical manifestation of some telekinetic power that also causes witnesses to report the BEKs being aware of their thoughts? From a folklore perspective, BEKs are an interesting class of entity. As one witness mentioned, they take the form of something that should be harmless, but their mannerisms and jet black eyes strike a chord that causes a defensive and concerned reaction from witnesses. This paradox of something that should be docile but acts almost predatory seems to make these entities all the more disturbing. In any case, it seems such questions will remain unanswered until this host receives a nighttime visit from these menacing delinquents. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode and invite you to share your thoughts about these chilling entities known as black-eyed children. Are they extra-dimensional demons, alien-human hybrids, ghosts, or even vampires? I'd like to know your theories. As always, you can interact with the show and stay up to date via our social media, with links in the show notes. I would also like to announce that our show is now available via Apple Podcasts. Please share this podcast with anyone you know who has a thirst for the strange and unknown. Also, a like or good review on whichever platform you tune in will go a long way to help grow the show. I invite you to tune in to our next broadcast, where I will discuss a reported alien abduction case that has fascinated me since my childhood. I am referring to the terrifying case of Travis Walton. I wish you a safe evening, and caution you against answering any suspicious knocks at your door, as you never know who, or perhaps what, is lurking on the other side. This has been your host, Chance, and I'm signing off.